All right, hey guys. So our next unit, we're going to talk about solving equations, and we're going to start with solving quadratic equations. And so quadratic equations are just ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are numbers. So something like we've been factoring, like x squared plus 6x plus 8. This is quadratic. We're now setting them equal to 0, and we're going to solve. So the first method we're going to talk about is solving by factoring, which is what this video will be about. And then later in the week, we're going to talk about solve by quadratic formula. And so both of these are review from Algebra 2. And so let's look at a few examples of solving by factoring. Okay, so at the top of your paper, you have your steps in order to solve by factoring. So the first thing you want to always do is make sure it's equal to 0. Okay. So if we look at example 1, all right, it is equal to 0 already. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is factor it. It's either going to be like a GCF, a difference of squares, a trinomial, or it could be a combination of them. Okay, so here I just have two terms, so it's not a trinomial. 18 and 2 are not perfect squares, so this one is going to be a GCF. Okay, it doesn't have 3 terms, and they're not perfect squares, so I have a GCF. All right, so I have 18x squared plus 2x equals 0. Now, I can divide both of these by 2 and an x. Okay, and so that is going to give me, I'm going to write it over here. 2x goes on the outside. Remember, your GCF always goes on the outside. And then when we divide, 18 divided by 2 is 9. That x squared, one of them will go away with that one, so it'll just be a 9x, plus 2x divided by 2x is just 1. Okay, now, once you factor it, we're now at step 3. You set each factor equal to 0. Okay, and so what I mean by that is I'm going to take 2x, that's one of my factors, and set it equal to 0. And then I'm going to take the 9x plus 1 and set it equal to 0. And now you have two linear equations where you can solve them each for x. So on this one, I would divide by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. Over here, I'm going to start by subtracting 1. It gives me 9x equals negative 1. Then I'm going to divide by 9. And that's x equals negative 1 over 9. And so these will be my answers for this problem. 0 and negative 1 over 9. Okay, so let's take a look at example 2. So first step, remember, is to make it equal to 0. It is not equal to 0. So I need to take this 5 in and move it to the other side. In order to do that, I have to subtract. Okay, so I'm going to subtract the 5 in, and I'm just going to put it right here. But I cannot subtract 36 and 5 in because the 5 has an n. So I'm going to rewrite it like this. Okay, the 5n goes in the middle because that's just your standard form for a quadratic. The 36 will be at the end, and then those will cancel out and give you a 0. Okay, now we have a trinomial. So this is just your trinomial factoring. Okay, so I'm going to write it down here. All right, so now I'm looking for factors of 36 that subtract to give me a negative 5. Okay, so I know I'm going to have an n and an n. My factors of 36. Okay, we have 1 and 36. We have 2 and 18. We have 3 and 12, we have 4 and 9, we have 6 and 6. Okay, but I've got to be able to subtract and get a -5. So I'm going to have to use 9 and 4, and my 9 will be negative. Okay, all right. So I'm going to erase this just so I have more room. All right, so now that it's factored, now I'm going to finish solving it. So I take each parentheses and set them equal to 0. So n minus 9 equals 0, and n plus 4 equals 0. In order to solve this for n, you add 9. So n equals 9, and over here you would subtract 4, and n would equal -4. And those are your two answers for this one. Okay, let's look at example 3. All right, so the first thing I want to do is make it equal to 0. So I need to move this 60 to the other side. In order to move it, I need to subtract it. Okay, so I'm going to have 5x squared plus 5x minus 60 equals 0. Okay, now hopefully you realize you can divide all of these by 5. So I have a GCF, but I'm also going to have a trinomial. So I'm going to have two things to do here. So the first thing I want to do is divide them all by 5. Okay, so the 5 will go on the outside. Those will cross out. So x squared plus, those will cross out again, x minus 12 and equals 0. Okay. All right, so now I'm looking for, now I have a trinomial. So what multiplies to give me -12 and adds to give me 1? Okay, so that's going to be a +4 and a -3. All right, and now I'm going to do the same thing we did on the other one. Take each factor, set it equal to 0. So I have 5 equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. Now, because this one doesn't have an x, this one just kind of goes away. So I'm not going to have an answer for that. All right, here I would subtract 4, and x would be -4. And here I would add 3, and so x would be 3. So my answers here are -4 and 3. Okay. All right, and so our next one, we need to make it equal to 0 as well. I can't see it. There we go. So in order to make this equal to 0, this 11x needs to come over here, and because it's negative, I need to add it, and that -4 needs to go over there too, and I need to add it. So this is going to become 6x squared plus 11x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, so we're going to check out our GCF first. So can you divide 6, 11, and 4 by the same number? Okay, no. So this is just your trinomial, but it is the bottoms up method. So I'm going to start by multiplying my 6 times my 4. And that gives me x squared plus 11x plus 24 equals 0. All right, so what multiplies to give me 24 and adds to give me 11? That's 8 and 3. Okay, but this is where you will now come back and divide by the 6. Okay, because I did not have a GCF in the beginning, I now have to divide that out. 8 divided by 6 will not divide, but it will simplify, dividing both by 2 to 4 over 3. And then 3 over 6 will reduce to 1 over 2. So those factored forms are 3x plus 4 and 2x plus 1 equals 0. So that is factored. And now to solve them, 3x plus 4 equals 0 and 2x plus 1 equals 0. So I'm taking each of them, setting it equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 4. That'll give me 3x equals negative 4. And then divide by 3. So x is negative 4 over 3. All right, over here I'm going to subtract 1. 2x equals negative 1. Divide by 2, and x equals negative 1 over 2. And those are your two answers here. Okay, now one final example, and it's going to work a little different. So I'm going to try to point out the difference here. Okay, notice here that we're missing the plain x term. Okay, so you're missing the x term. Okay, if you are missing the x term, you can solve it as is. You do not have to factor. Okay, so only when the x term, I have an x squared and I have a constant, but I don't have the x. Okay, so when you're doing these, you can just start solving. So I don't have to worry about making it equal to 0. I can divide both sides by 3 to get rid of this 3. 75 divided by 3 is 25. And then to get rid of a square root, you will do the square root of both sides. So I'm going to square root and square root. So once I do that, I have x equals, and it will be a positive or a negative. So the square root of x squared is x. Square root of 25 will be a positive or a negative 5. And so I have x equals 5 and x equals negative 5 as my answers. So you can only do them this way, though, when it's missing the x term.